weeks, so we've been entertained to quite some drama, especially in the National Assembly, as MPs debated the political party's amendment bill. Quite a number of issues, at least they dealt with more than 30 amendments to that bill, with 7 months to go to the next elections. And probably Kenyans may be wondering, what exactly was this drama about? And my panelists are ready to try and break it down for us. Gentlemen, Dismas, of course, probably the biggest point of contention initially was a coalition parties clause, a clause on coalition parties and how soon or how late they can be formed. And the question probably now is, how big of a deal is it? How big of a deal is it for either of the political formations that this clause needed to be amended, or this part of this political parties act needed to be amended?
Well, maybe first things first. When you look at the behavior of the members of the National Assembly, it was unacceptable for these members to come to the National Assembly and start displaying brawn instead of using their brain and logic for persuasion. There was a lot of unnecessary noise, and you saw the highest level of octane sycophancy because the members wanted to please their masters who are out of the house. And really that's unacceptable. Even to the extent that there is physical altercations, that MPs are engaging in physical fights, which is unacceptable. Number two, this bill is timely, or the amendments are timely, because the reason why Kenya gets into tension every 5 years, we don't have very strong electoral laws. So any piece of legislation to sanitize the place is acceptable. But the bone of contention was the fact that you need to have the coalition party registered 6 months to the election. Now, when you're coming up with any piece of legislation in Kenya, it's not supposed to be targeted at specific individuals, or you use a piece of legislation to achieve your selfish end. Right now, it was the end of December, so you are coming up with a piece of legislation and you want a certain political group to formalize their relationship, and then you are giving them 1 month. And we know for a fact that all over the world, coalition building is not instant coffee or instant tea. It requires a lot of negotiations. Whether you want to look at Germany just after they did the elections, it took a while, or if you look at Israel, it takes a while before they come up with a coalition. But I think for the Kenyan purpose, it is very clear that the people they wanted to push into one particular corner is One Kenya Alliance, because they wanted One Kenya Alliance to see whether or not they can formalize their relationship, or whether they're going to support Ruto, or whether they're going to support Raila. But when you look at the entirety of the piece of legislation, it's very solid, because one of the things, again, they're looking at is we need political parties to tell us their policies or their philosophy or their ideology when they're being registered. Right now, anybody with money and a bit of political influence will register a political party. And then number two, sharing of revenues, because from the political parties fund, there's been a lot of money, and ODM stands accused by the other NASA partners that they did not share these resources. So this bill is going to sanitize elections, but the elephant in the room is, how come for this kind of important piece of legislation, it's been brought at the tail end, at the 11th hour? Don't we know that in Kenya, elections are held every 5 years? How come we didn't bring this piece of legislation early on? Much earlier. So that there is substantive public participation.
Wakili Nyaribo, of course, many Kenyans are wondering why the urgency, just as Dismas mentions here. And probably, given the kind of language that members of parliament use, even in their debating in the House, many Kenyans would be lost on the importance of such legislation. So if at all you could break it down to us, how does it change the game, if at all, for the big players or even the smaller players as we head to the elections?
I think it has become clear in our history, in the history of voting in Kenya, that elections are not actually just held on the particular voting day. Elections, preparations, and the coalition building, mergers, and who you network and stand with is very important and critical in terms of you winning on the actual voting day. And when you talk about coalitions, I hear many people, try to bring in what has been done in South Africa, in Israel, in, UK and other countries. We are a very unique nation, and we build our own local scenarios. I mean, we must appreciate we are a nation of over 51 years now, and we cannot be talking about what is done elsewhere. It is good for comparative reasons, but we can start it our way. So the reason why you should not amend laws just when you are about to do your elections, is so that the state and National Assembly and the government does not seem to coerce or cajole others to follow their ways. So, but it is what the people want. It is what the nation wants. The nation wants to go together. They want to stop violence. They want to all coalitions stand for something. So if you say we want to create, let's call it an OKA coalition or a UDA coalition or a Azimio coalition, all these groups stand for something. And when you try to block them not to come together because of certain technicalities, people are talking about why now, why not previously. I mean, you are in this country, you see what has been happening every year around, what kind of politicking has been going on. Somebody suggests something, but another person objects to it, and you find yourself, you are actually nearing elections, and you need that coalition. So I do not hold the view that it is wrong for coalitions to be built, but what must be held in everybody's proper mind is that people want to come together as a country, and the question of the coalitions coming near to the elections can be handled properly by the courts and the National Assembly.
Okay, thank you. Wakili Echesa, of course, initially, when this debate started in the National Assembly, it appeared like one side of the political divide was keen on the formation of coalitions, while the other was not keen on coalitions at all. Towards the end of the debate, of course, it appears that this stance had changed somewhat to some extent. Because Deputy President William Ruto has for quite some time now insisted that any person who wants to work with him has to dissolve or do away with their own political parties and join the UDA vehicle. While on the other hand, Raila Odinga is keen on bringing different parties together. Is this the board of contention, and do you think that either of these strategies could work towards the election? And how have they been affected so far?
And probably it is working, Fred, because in my opinion, what took place in Parliament in the past 1 or 2 weeks is three-pronged. One, it was a political contest between Azimio la Umoja adherents and the supporters of William Ruto in Tanga. And they were fighting for three things. The first thing was taking charge of the other's calendar. It's like the Azimio wants to use the process to take charge of the calendar of their opponents. It is telling Oka through this bill that you're not going to do press conferences until June and July and come and surprise us with a candidate or with a coalition. You have in the next 2 months to make up your decision to either join the other team or join us or declare that you're going it along. They have succeeded to that end, because now all political players have the next 2 months to make their decisions known to the public. It is no longer going to be a secret weapon by players. And number two, on the coalitions question, it was a contest between Raila Odinga's perspective and William Ruto's perspective. Raila Odinga has opened his arms. He is willing to work with other parties in a structured coalition. William Ruto had hitherto this bill had closed his doors, and he was saying, whoever wants to work with me, let him join UDA. But when this bill, with this amendment gained momentum, he opened the windows. The door is still closed, but the windows are open and saying, the rest can come to UDA, but for Ford Kenya and ANC, we can have a coalition's talk. To that end, Raila has managed to politically fix William Ruto. Because if William Ruto is not going to admit smaller parties in a structured coalition with UDA, Raila Odinga is going to admit them in the Azimio la Umoja. And that is why in the recent past, we've seen key players in central Kenya coming out and being friendly to Raila Odinga. Because if they are outfoxed in the other end, they'll come to Azimio, maintain their identity, and work within that coalition. And number three, I think the centrality of the registrar of political parties cannot be gainsaid. The registrar is a very critical and essential player in any political contest. He's going to supervise nomination. She's in charge of the register. She's more of a referee. But she has been given what the Tanga MPs have called imperial powers. She has been made very powerful. And why Tangatanga was fighting against the imperial powers given to the registrar, they believe that in a way or the other, the office of the registrar of political parties is an extension of the state, is an extension of the deep state. And that particular office could be exploited to the disadvantage of other players. I do not hold the same view, because with the nature of our progressive constitution and the independence of the judiciary, however imperial, however monster an institution becomes in this country, the courts will always hold brakes or tell them that this has been done beyond their powers. Therefore, the three objectives, insofar as I'm concerned, the pro-Odinga movement is succeeding to fix their opponents through the amendments.
Of course, it should not be forgotten that the Senate still will have a say on this piece of legislation. They're holding a special sitting on Tuesday. Whether or not things will play out the same way they played out at the National Assembly is a wait and see. But things could change, Hesbon. Things could change. Please take us through the possibilities of what could happen at the Senate.
Well, I don't think there's much that is likely to change at the Senate, because if you look at the numbers and the discourse that we saw in the National Assembly, chances are at the Senate you're going to be a lot more substantive. You look at the brains that we have in the Senate. These are guys who are much more elevated in their thinking and their thought process, and even if they're going to engage with this bill, I think the engagement is going to be a lot more substantive. But you can't rule out the fact that politics is at play, and what Wakili Echesa is talking about is going to play out at the Senate. That we'll see the people who feel that a win and an enactment of this bill is a win for Raila Odinga will try and frustrate that. And the guys who want it to look like it's a win for Raila Odinga will actually try and make it smooth sailing. But be it as it may, I think because I'm not a politician, I really don't care which political side wins. The critical issue here is, do we have a reason, to sanitize our political processes? And is there something substantive in this bill that remedies all the chaos that we've had in the past? And I would say yes. So there are two things that we need to look at: the whole process of enacting this bill, and then the substance of the bill. So the issue on the process has always been, why now? And I think folks in the Deputy President's camp have been talking about the false agency to have this bill enacted now, because it is targeting certain political ends towards the election, which from where I see it is either naive or just dishonesty, because conversations around these bills, and there are actually two bills. There's one by Mbadi and there's the other one by Kimunya, and they've been combined. Conversations around this bill, especially by Amos Kimunya himself, started around 2017, immediately, after that election. So it is dishonest to start saying that this thing has been brought now. We've had those conversations. Then the second thing about the process is the fact that, was this bill published within time that enabled Kenyans to have sufficient public participation? Yes, because both bills were published around the 21st and the 26th of November, published on the website of Parliament, and if anyone wanted to discuss this bill, they had all that opportunity. Then when you come back to the substance, I think for me there are a number of things that emerge, three key things. One is that we are moving away from just having political parties as it is in the current constitution and the Political Parties Act of 2011 to a situation where we'll have corporate political parties. And what that does is that we'll still have the identity of political parties in terms of the formation, the national outlook, and the threshold that they have to meet. But then when these political parties decide to form a coalition, then that coalition in itself can become a political party. And the advantage of this is the fact that when a coalition becomes a political party, even the small political parties that would, under normal circumstances and under this current Political Parties Act regime, wouldn't get any funding. Once they become part of a coalition, which is a corporate political party, then they can sign a pre-election agreement, even a post-election agreement, to decide on how they are going to share funds. And for me, I think that is a better way of building political parties, because even small political parties will have strength within this corporate entity. Then number two, if you look at what we've had since the NARC government and all that, people talk about our politicians are dishonest. There is no integrity in our politics, and our politics is essentially politics of deceit. And there are guys who are saying that you cannot legislate honesty. You cannot legislate honesty if it is honesty between Dismas and Hezbollah, because it is not anything of public interest. But when political parties are coming together to look for votes, then that honesty becomes a function of the public. And therefore, if this law is going to find a way of enforcing commitment to an arrangement that brings political parties together, then it is a good law, irrespective of whether it is favoring Raila or the deputy president right now. It is a good law. It means that going forward, we will have a situation where 6 months before the election, we know what brings political parties together, we know what each political party will get. And then lastly, I think having political parties have this coalition formation 6 months to an election is good for the electoral process, because then the public will be entitled to start interrogating this, and we'll have a longer period to interrogate formations that join together as political parties. So anyone who wants to deceive Kenyans that having these 6 months prior to an election is forcing people to declare, their positions, is lying to Kenyans. It's a question of Kenyans will have more time to understand these coalitions and make a decisions on which coalition to give the power.
Wakili Nyaribo, Bwana Husband here has raised a very pertinent issue in as far as Kenya's history when it comes to coalition formation and the existence of coalition and the sustainability of such coalitions. Parties have been accused of being bullies within coalitions, and many of these coalitions have disintegrated at some point, even after forming government. Do you think that what has happened in the National Assembly and what is going to happen during this process of legislation that could actually remedy the way we deal, the way we handle with, and the way we run coalitions in Kenya?
If you go to a boxing ring, you must have enough muscle to fight. Basically, there is a heavyweight, heavyweight, featherweight. When you see members of parliament, they have all been elected and they are powerful enough. When you look at ODM, you look at UDA, Jubilee, you look at all these parties, they are recognized under the Political Parties Act, and they are recognized by the state. They all get money, whichever way, whether they get more or less than the other ones. When they go to this kind of open ring or field, they must fight. So whether ODM is fighting for its interests so aggressively, more than the Ford Kenya is doing, or more than a white party, because of numbers, that is what it is in party democracy. So coalitions, it is true, must be careful, must create good rules to govern, and protect each party. At least the minorities should be, allowed to exercise their democratic rights. But in the end, really, Fred, it is numbers that matter. It is the majority that wins. So if a smaller party in a coalition feels that they are not, they are in a way aggrieved, the best thing to do is to sit at the National Council and make certain rules to protect the smaller parties. But once voting comes in, and you go all over the country saying we have 150, 200 members of parliament, but at the time of voting, like I saw them, showing an envelope and saying some people were either bribed or something. I mean, nobody knows that. That's just a statement. The moment a winning team has had the day, always the smaller party or the loser will be complaining. So I'm just saying that the coalitions, yes, must be structured properly, but there shouldn't be any complaint once a certain majority party in a coalition has carried the day.
And that's the same question, because you look at different jurisdictions and different systems of government, and coalition formation is something very pertinent, because it is not simply a vehicle towards the electoral process, but also determines how these parties or how the strength in parliament in terms of even running the country. But it appears in the Kenyan situation, Dismas, that we are only trying to fix the problem in as far as winning the election. We don't really care about what happens after. So yes, you've won an election, courtesy of a coalition, but after that everything disintegrates because one party is bigger than the rest and mistreats the rest, so that even in their conduct in the National Assembly and in the Senate, they're no longer together.
Well, that's a very pertinent point that you raise, and it goes back to the raison d'etre of coming up with the piece of legislation. There have been conversations for over 5 years about the need of having this piece of legislation, because we must sanitize our electoral process. And this legislation is consistent with our national and public interest. But the only challenge is that now you're pushing it through the House Business Committee so as to use it as a special advantage against your competition. That's the only bone of contention, because most of the pieces there are very exciting. For instance, what you're talking about is that every political party in Kenya must state its party ideology, so that when you go through the political party, you know where do they sit. But unfortunately in Kenya, we don't have those kind of political parties. If you go to the West, you would see a political party, then you say these are on the right or these are on the left. You know, like if you go to the United States of America, for the Democrats, you can tell their position on taxation. For the Conservatives, you can tell their position on taxation. Now, there are many parties. Others are called green parties, so that you know these guys are very keen on global warming. But when you look at the political parties in Kenya, they are special purpose vehicles for merely winning an election. So even if you demand that indicate to us your philosophy, they'll just get a clever master students to do 10 paragraphs for them that are, you know, we are leaning on the left or we are leaning on the right. So that one doesn't differentiate anything. So the bone of contention is that our political parties in Kenya are merely special purpose vehicles for winning office. Yesterday, the African National Congress in South Africa, they gave out an elaborate statement on where their party stands. And even the EFF yesterday in South Africa still, they gave out an elaborate position on where their party stands. But in Kenya, if you take all these political parties and you pull out their manifestos, there's a very high chance that it's the same manifesto which is being shared among all these political parties. So really, there is no difference. And for us to make progress, we must start voting in political parties because of the ideals they're presenting. But right now, simply, it's because of the powerful political personalities. For instance, don't you find it amazing that a majority of the MPs in Rift Valley identify with the bottom-up economic policy, and the majority of, say, MPs from Nyanza province identify with Azimio la Umoja, and they have not even interrogated. I mean, if today, for instance, Ruto decides to join Azimio la Umoja, everybody will say, well, I mean, this bottom-up has been a fallacy. We can't identify with it. So for these coalitions to make sense, Kenyans need to grow up politically and mature and start voting with their selfish interest in mind. Because right now, unfortunately, we are held hostage by our tribal chiefs. We are held hostage because most of us are emotional and irrational voters. Whatever our political parties tell us, we run with it. You know, for the longest time, the deputy president has indicated that I'm going to form UDA to be a very strong national party. I'm not going to allow coalitions. But believe you me, the moment he started saying, wait a minute, I'd like to have a conversation with Musalia Mudavadi and Moses Wetangula, all his members all of a sudden changed tune. They said, you are the brightest of them all. We want to align with this. And of course,
Wakili Ken Chesa, there's something to be said about the coalitions after the elections, because the history in Kenya has always been that you form a coalition, then because of the coalition, you win the election. After that, it disintegrates, yet the government still remains. We've seen in other jurisdictions where if at all the disintegration of a coalition means that you lose your opportunity to govern and you have to seek the mandate afresh. It is a different political system in Kenya, but do you think that we're actually heading in that direction where coalitions will be key, even beyond the election?
That is what the law on paper seems to be suggesting. But Fred, there is a fundamental difference between law as it appears on paper and law as it works, or law in action. The draft bill makes it very clear that these political coalitions will survive post-election, so that we're not just forming coalitions for the purposes of attaining political power, but we are forming coalitions for the purposes of attaining power, retaining power, and putting the said power to the desired use based on the collective manifestos of the parties forming the coalition. But in Kenya, just as you've rightly put, it is not very important post the election. It's like after the coalitions have been used to attain what they intended to attain, that trust collapses and the use of the coalitions comes to an end. Is it going to be different just because we've put it in legislation? The response is in the negative. My good friend, my good colleague panelist has stated we cannot legislate on morals. It is not very, very important to legislate and make Dismas an honest man or make Nyaribo a truth teller. We cannot. We can't put one thing in the law, but what motivates our actions is actually our conscience. Have we attained the era of having political conscience or conscience to honor political deals? In civilized democracies, we do not require legislation for the coalition deals to go through. And the collapse of our coalition in other democracies would mean a collapse of a government, would mean disintegration of a government. But in Kenya, when a coalition collapses after an election, the other players come in and fill the vacuum. Look at the Jubilee, to me, was a party, but which party was based on the principles of our coalition. But when there was a fallout between the president and the deputy, that party disintegrated. If it had been a coalition, it would have disintegrated. But when William Ruto left, Raila Odinga came with his troops and filled into the gap. And the president is not feeling the absence of that political support that William Ruto had given him ahead of the 2 elections that he has had. So it is our political mannerism, it is our political conscience, the maturity of our democracy as a nation that will dictate the success of post-election coalitions, the success of the law that we are making now. Otherwise, relying on written law alone will not yield much. Players will always find a way of circumventing the written law and doing what they deem fit at the right time. And
they continue to do so because when it comes to indiscipline, I think we have one of the most indisciplined parliaments, because even those who rebel against their own parties are still sitting members of the National Assembly and the Senate. So therefore, what does it mean about this law in terms of discipline? And because politicians know how to go through to actually circumvent the same laws that they legislate.
The same constitution protects members from party leaders who may have dictatorial tendencies. So if somebody is a member of a political party, it's practically impossible to kick the member out. For instance, look at Senator Isaac Mwaura. He was thrown out of office, but he's back. Look at nominated MP Osotsi. He was expelled from ANC a long time ago, but he's still a member of the National Assembly. And I think that piece of legislation is in good state because you may end up having a party leader who is a dictator, and if there is any divergence of views, then they'll kick you out. But coming back to your earlier question on the collapse of governments, probability of a coalition mess up, collapsing a government in a presidential democracy like the Kenyan style is almost zero. Because those shifting numbers do not affect the position of the president. The president will be firmly at State House, and the only thing he'll do is to look for another political party or manipulate the MPs using the pecuniary incentives, give them contracts, tenders, things like this, and then they come back online. Or in the case of President Kenyatta, look for Raila Odinga. But if you had a parliamentary democracy, say that the House is made up of 100 members, and you've got a razor-thin win, one party has got 49 and another one has got 51. It means that if 2 or 3 members move from one political party to another, then the parliamentary democracy will work and you'll have a new administration. And that tends to work almost every day in Japan, where a member moves and the system collapses, and it also works in Israel, where a member moves and it collapses. So in my view, the intentions are very genuine, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with Mora, the voter, because we do not punish our legislators for bad manners. Instead, we reward them for bad manners. Believe you me, this Linturi, who that we can't repeat what he said, back in his village, is being described as a hero today. And I'll be surprised if there are no demonstrations in his village today to say that that is our son. He spoke for us. So the Kenyan voter, if he wants us to go to the next level, we must start punishing bad manners.
Okay. And issues with coalition and coalition parties will be key, even as we move towards the next election. Coalition formation has to happen in about 2 months or so from now. By April, any coalition should have deposited its agreement with the Register of Political Parties. And it will be very interesting to see how the formations will be 4 months ahead of the elections. And one of those things that will definitely determine this is a position of the One Kenya Alliance, whether or not it will form its own coalition, or will it disintegrate and form coalitions with others. When it comes to One Kenya Alliance, Western Kenya holds quite a huge stake, given that the two major parties come from there. That's Ford Kenya and the ANC, that's Amani National Congress. The fact that the two major or main contenders for the top position of president in this country have been camping in Western Kenya over the last 2 weeks is something that we'll be discussing after the break. Why the focus on